we did one last version of the visual effects shot so we could see a little more butt crack, and I think it helped. Spoiler alert.
So first of all, you're kicking off phase 5. What does that conversation look like with Kevin Feige? What do you guys talk about? Is there anything that like, hey, you've got to do this, this, and that?
I think one of the things, we started writing this script, and I think even shooting the movie, we may have even finished the movie before it was determined that we were kicking off phase 5. I think really what it was, I screened my director's cut, and the movie obviously is much bigger than the first 2 Ant-Man movies. And that was one of the things that Kevin and Stephen Broussard, our producer, discussed early on, is let's do something different for this third one and introduce a major villain. Jonathan Majors, I think, just leapt off the screen as Kang the Conqueror. And it really felt like, okay, this is pointing the way toward, a whole new phase for Marvel. So that was exciting, obviously, for us with Ant-Man. Is the original idea, I think, was, we want to pay off some of the stuff we set up in the first 2 movies. Let's go down into the quantum realm. Let's answer the question of what Janet Van Dyne was doing down there for 30 years. And it also occurred to us that would be a perfect venue to introduce this new character. I obviously knew Kang the Conqueror from the comic books, one of the Mount Rushmore of Marvel Comics villains. And we love the idea of this, on paper, kind of lopsided confrontation between Ant-Man and Wasp and Kang. There was just tension in that idea from the beginning.
Was Kang always a part of the movie, or was that something that you guys were like, now we want to build up to Kang Dynasty?
Kang was always a part of the movie, yeah. I mean, because we really wanted to find a villain in the MCU or in the comics realm that really, was gonna be someone absolutely formidable for Ant-Man and Wasp to go up against. Kang made sense just because, as the MCU has been steering toward these multiversal stories, and in the comics he's obviously a time traveler, but it made sense to sort of adapt him for that, and it worked with what was going to go on in Loki. So very early on, as they were developing Loki and we were developing this movie, it just made sense.
He's so good. You're right when he says he just like leaps off the page. Like he is just, you can tell how strong he is in some of these battles. I'm curious because there were a lot of theories, and even some that I had where I was like, I think someone in the Ant family is not going to make it out of this movie. Like I was very nervous about that. Was that something that you guys ever talked about?
Listen, as we were developing the movie early on, as with all the movies, everything is on the table from the beginning. I mean, there were drafts of the first Ant-Man movie early on where Hank Pym died in the first movie. But, it's always something we wanted to talk about as we got to it. And I think, we certainly lead the audience down a path, at least in this movie, that, hold on, what's going to happen to Scott Lang at the end of this movie? We like the idea of playing around with that, but we certainly never intended to kill Scott Lang. I would have to go into exile. I wouldn't be able to, to kill off Paul Rudd. I mean, you could certainly kill off Paul Rudd, but it just didn't make sense in terms of the progression of this trilogy of movies. That just did not make sense. But there's always those discussions about, who's going to be, who's not going to make it out alive, who's not going to make it to the end of the movie.
God, this is kind of off of Quantumania, but one of my favorite characters that you introduced was Ghost, and I'm wondering how you're feeling that she's coming back for Thunderbolts.
Oh man, I love it. Hannah is fantastic, and I loved her in that role, and I loved what we were doing in that movie, which is to sort of create not a villain necessarily, but an antagonist who just was the result of this horrible accident and, was sort of pulled into service as an assassin, but really, we gave her, a sort of redemption arc. And I love to see that she's going to live to fight in one way or another day. I'm stoked about that.
Oh, that's awesome. So a lot of times when you think of a trilogy, I think it's like also my Star Wars brain a little bit. You're like, oh, that's a trilogy. That is the completion of this. And I think Thor was the first one, I think, to get a 4th film. Did you always envision Ant-Man as a trilogy, or do you feel like there's more films to go there?
I mean, I confess definitely, like when we were doing the first movie, we just wanted to make sure the first movie worked, right? Like, I mean, but in the back of your brain, we grew up, I was part of that generation that grew up on the original Star Wars trilogy and the Back to the Future trilogy, and what at the time was Indiana Jones trilogy. So it made sense, and I liked the idea because it really did have this 3-act structure as we started developing this story, particularly with the Scott-Cassie dynamic. She's 6 years old in the first movie, 9 in the second one, and now she's 18 because of the results of, what happened in Endgame. But that felt good to us. That felt like if that relationship is sort of the emotional spine of the Ant-Man movies and they're about family, it's sort of seeing Cassie become a hero in her own right. She, she's not a little girl anymore. She's a young woman and has her own ideas about morality and idealism and what being a hero for her generation means as opposed to Scott's. So that felt like a strong trilogy. Again, I think it's terrible to assume you're going to get another movie, right? I wanted to make sure that if we didn't get another movie, this felt like, it told a story in 3 movies.
I felt like there was a little bit of essence of Star Wars in the quantum realm a little bit.
Yeah, listen, it's me. I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars, but I think it's also this idea of let's create something new. I mean, listen, working on Mandalorian was a joy for me to actually get to work in the Star Wars universe. This thing, I wanted to kind of pull from all of these different things that inspired me as a kid and as an adult, Heavy Metal magazine and, science fiction paperback covers and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Flash Gordon, different things. And because we had to populate this entire sort of worlds within worlds idea and create all these different aesthetics for the groups that made up the freedom fighters and all the people that they encounter. And also to sort of service Janet Van Dyne's story. What the hell was she doing down there for 30 years and finding out that she had a much richer life down there in many ways than she had up on Earth.
The Bill Murray thing was so funny.
Yeah, but we needed someone to come in there who sort of represented her past life. And this one really in a trilogy that's really about family, that we explore the secrets that family members keep from each other. And the fact that she had some kind of relationship with this guy down there also struck us as funny of, sitting Michael Douglas and Bill Murray at a table and have these 2 alpha males go at each other. It struck us as funny.
Yeah. We have to talk about M.O.D.O.K, also a great comic relief in the movie, but also like one of those things where, we've seen M.O.D.O.K in animation and it's like this character could never cross over to live action. Like how on earth would it work? And it works so well. I'm curious what that process was like for you. Was that really, really tough? Were there different designs?
M.O.D.O.K was tricky, and particularly the version of M.O.D.O.K we did, which, you've seen the movie. It hinges on sort of this character having a prior relationship with our heroes, obviously with Hank, who was his mentor at one point, and Scott, who was his rival. And he's also the guy who came into Cassie's bedroom when she was 6 and tried to kill her. It made sense in terms of progressing these characters. And then the couple of things that we really wanted to do, like, again, we played around, like, can we put that sort of Beetle bowl cut on Corey Stoll and have it make sense? And at a certain point, it felt like, well, no, this is a different version. We want a quick read that this is still Darren Cross. And the other thing is, a lot of times in animation, they put M.O.D.O.K in a context where he's just sort of silly or playing at it. We wanted to actually introduce him as the thing he says he is, a mechanized organism designed only for killing. So we introduce him, just laying waste to this freedom fighter village before we reveal who he is. But that was a real challenge for all the obvious reasons.
I love that you guys leaned into it too, with just like the Ant-Man being like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah. Well, that was a fun, like, M.O.D.O.K is living in his own movie. In his head, he is like the most memorable villain of all time. And in fact, Scott's forgotten about him, Hank's forgotten him, they've all forgotten about him until he shows up again. But in his head, he's the main villain in this movie.
I love that we see M.O.D.O.K's butt.
Well, that was, come on. That was the best. That was the thing that we conceived, and it was in the movie for a brief period. It was out of the movie. It's like, well, we gotta have the butt back. And in fact, we did one last version of the visual effects shot so we could see a little more butt crack, and I think it helped.
The butt cut. Thank you.
Yeah,
we got the butt cut. I want to dig into the post-credit scenes a little bit. Did you direct both of those, and how do you decide which ones are going to be?
I directed the first one, which was, we knew we wanted to sort of just give a tiny taste of the potential of what some of these variants, these Kang variants are, and brief nods to Ramatut, Centurion, Immortus. Maybe not the prime versions, maybe they're variants of those versions, but just to sort of let Jonathan run and have some fun. But always my idea was, let's end this thing with that classic panel of the Council of Kangs and do our version of that with all these different Jonathans. So that became its own sort of separate shoot, much like the shoot we did with Paul earlier in the movie where there are multiple Pauls. It's a technical nightmare to do those sequences. And it only works if you have actors like Paul and Jonathan who can really, get specific with each of those individual characters and their responses. And so that was fun. The second one, the final tag, is actually a cut down version of a scene from season 2 of Loki.
Oh, okay.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
So, that's obviously Victor Timely, another Kang variant, and I love how I went by the set when they were shooting that, and I loved his Frederick Douglass hair and his whole sort of the period intonation of his voice and everything. So it really was to sort of tease the audience with the idea of, like, in Phase 5, you're going to meet a lot of different variants.
It's going to be interesting because at the time we're recording this, the movie's not out yet. I think I don't know if anyone is going to realize that the Kang that we're getting in this movie is going to die. Like, this is not.
Yes. I think one of the things we wanted to do, and again, as you set out to do these movies, you don't want to repeat what's been done before, and you want to just try and catch the audience off guard, for good or for bad, surprise them and show them something different and unexpected. And I think that we do that throughout the movie.
Yeah. Just going back to the variants that are in that first post-credits scene, how did you pick which ones they were going to be?
We talked a lot about who we wanted to tease and sort of, as Jeff Loveness, who wrote this movie, is starting to write, or is now well into writing Kang Dynasty, what we wanted to sort of tease the audience with, and not get too definitive with, like, okay, here's the one who's going to be in this thing or whatever, but just sort of to tease the thing. We knew, weirdly, like Rama Tut, just this sort of ancient Egyptian version in the comics was something that had potential, but then we sort of bent it a little bit and made him this very strange sort of bionic variant of Rama Tut. But we wanted to give 3 distinct feelings and set up the idea of this triumvirate inside this sort of star chamber. And now that Kang the Conqueror has met the fate he meets at the end of this movie, what does it mean for the larger sort of political body of Kangs, right? What happens in this sort of Godfather type thing of this power struggle of, well, why was he, in the movie we reveal that he was exiled into the quantum realm, and why and who did it. But sort of starting to get into sort of the political aspect of how the Kangs relate to each other, which I think holds really strong potential for Phase 5.
Yeah, definitely. My first thought, I was like, oh, like, that's how you can get Moon Knight back in. I don't know. Well, Peyton, thank you so much for your time. Have there been any movement on a Bring It On sequel or what?
I was hoping, Ash, it was going to be your patented Bring It On question. There have been, again, Kirsten and I talk periodically, and Gabrielle, and I've been spending a lot of time with Jessica. This book just came out about the making of Bring It On that Case Wickman wrote, and just did an amazing job about that whole process. So we've been talking about how we're going to structure it and do it. So we're there's some forward momentum.
We love to hear it.
Do your cheers, Ash.
Burr! It's cold in here. I said there must be some Peyton in the quantum realm.
There we go. We tried to work cheerleaders into Quantumania, but we just didn't have room.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. Wonderful to see you as always. I'll see you on Twitter.
Too, Ash.